We need to have
testimony in the confirmation hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee for Defense Secretary nominee Leon Panetta from earlier this month. This afternoon, the full Senate will take up the nomination of Mr. Panetta. He currently serves as the director of the CIA. Debate on his nomination will last until about 4:15 when they'll hold a final vote. Now, live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Correct. 2 hours of debate equally divided.
I thank the presiding officer, and I yield myself 10 minutes, Mr. President. The nomination of Leon Panetta to be Secretary of Defense is a wise and a solid nomination. Director Panetta has given decades of dedicated public service to this nation, and we should all be grateful that he is once again willing to answer the call and take the helm of the Department of Defense. We're also grateful to his wife, Sylvia, for her significant sacrifices over the last 50 years in supporting Leon Panetta's efforts in the public and the private sectors. When Mr. Panetta appeared before the Armed Services Committee at his nomination hearing, all of our members commented invariably in the same way, reflecting the view that we are grateful that Mr. Panetta is willing to take on this position. He's going to bring a reassuring level of continuity and in-depth experience. He's been a critical member of President Obama's national security team during his tenure as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Department of Defense will need Director Panetta's skill and his wisdom to navigate the extraordinarily complex set of challenges in the years ahead. Foremost among those demands are the demands on our armed forces. And these are exemplified by the ongoing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Between those two conflicts, we continue to have approximately 150,000 troops deployed. The U.S. military is also providing support to NATO operations to protect the Libyan people. In addition, even after the extraordinary raid that killed Osama bin Laden, we face potential terrorist threats against us and against our allies, which emanate from Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and other places. The risk of a terrorist organization getting their hands on and detonating an improvised nuclear device or other weapon of mass destruction remains one of the gravest possible threats to the United States. To counter that threat, the Defense Department is working with the Departments of State, Energy, Homeland Security, and other U.S. government agencies to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons, fissile materials, and dangerous technologies. And as Secretary of Defense, Director Panetta's leadership in this area will be of vital importance. And here again, it's that experience as Director of the CIA which will be so invaluable. In the coming weeks, President Obama and his advisors will face a number of key national security decisions. While the drawdown of U.S. forces in Iraq remains on track, there have been recent signs of instability in that country. As a result, it's possible that Iraq's political leadership may ask for some kind of continuing U.S. military presence beyond the December 31st withdrawal deadline, which has been agreed to by President Bush and Prime Minister Maliki in the 2008 security agreement. Another key decision point is looming in Afghanistan regarding reductions in U.S. forces starting next month. President Obama said the other day, quote, "It's now time for us to recognize that we've accomplished a big chunk of our mission and that it's time for Afghans to take more responsibility," close quote. The President also said a few months ago that the reductions starting next month will be, quote, "significant." Hopefully they will be. And Director Panetta, while not assigning a specific number, agreed that they need to be significant. A significant reduction in our troop level this year would send a critical signal to Afghan leaders that we mean it when we say that our commitment is not open-ended and that they need to be urgently focused on preparing Afghanistan's security forces to assume security responsibility for all of Afghanistan. The more that Afghan security forces do that, the better are the chances of success, because the Taliban's biggest nightmare is facing a large, effective Afghan army, an army which is already respected by the Afghan people, but now, hopefully and soon, in control of Afghanistan's security. Another major issue facing the Department is the stress that 10 years of unbroken war has placed on our armed forces. Over the last decade, many of our servicemen and women have been away from their families and homes for multiple tours. Not only is our force stressed, so are our military families. We owe them our best efforts to reduce the number of deployments and increase the time between deployments. The next Secretary of Defense will have to struggle with the competing demands on our forces while Washington struggles with an extremely challenging fiscal environment. The defense budget will not and should not be exempt from cuts, but Congress, working with the next Secretary of Defense, will need to scrub each defense program and expenditure and make the tough choices and trade-offs between our warfighters' requirements today and preparations for the threats of tomorrow. Last week, the Armed Services Committee marked up the fiscal year 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. The committee cut about $6 billion from the President's budget request. However, the President has decided to reduce the national security budgets for the next 12 years by $400 billion, but we don't know how much of that $400 billion he will recommend to come from the defense budget and how much from the intelligence and homeland security budgets, or how much is recommended to be in the first of that 12-year period, fiscal year 2012. The nation is fortunate that Director Panetta's compelling record of achievement and experiences is well suited to the demands of the position of the Secretary of Defense. Mr. Panetta is the right person to help our military through the fiscal challenges that confront this nation. His service as President Clinton's director of the Office of Management and Budget is invaluable because he understands the budget process and because he shaped the decisions that helped achieve the budget surpluses of the late 1990s. Leon Panetta has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to reach across party lines and work in a bipartisan spirit since entering public service 45 years ago. He worked on the staff of the Republican whip in the U.S. Senate and headed the Office of Civil Rights in the Nixon administration. He later won election to the House of Representatives as a Democrat, where he served 16 years, earning the respect of his peers and becoming the chairman of the House Budget Committee. Throughout his time in public service, Leon Panetta has been guided by a clear moral compass. He has said that, quote, "In politics, there has to be a line beyond which you don't go, the line that marks the difference between right and wrong, what your conscience tells you is right. Too often, people don't know where the line is," he said, "and my family, how I was raised," he said, "my education all reinforced my being able to see that line," close quote. Leon Panetta has been intimately involved in the most pressing national security issues of our time during his tenure as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. President Obama turned to Director Panetta to personally oversee the manhunt for Osama bin Laden and the awe-inspiring operation that brought an end to al-Qaeda's murderous leader and provided a measure of relief to the families and friends who have suffered since September 11, 2001. The raid on the bin Laden compound epitomizes the way in which the CIA and the Defense Department are finally working together to support each other in counterterrorism operations, and Director Panetta deserves credit for this close coordination. Before concluding, I want to pass along my gratitude and deep admiration for the man who is stepping down as head of the Department of Defense, Secretary Robert Gates. Secretary Gates has provided extraordinary service to this country, spanning the administration of 8 presidents. 4.5 years ago, he left the comfort and rewards of private life following a long career in government to once again serve in the critical post of President Bush's Secretary of Defense at one of the most difficult times in recent history. Throughout his tenure, across the Bush and Obama administrations, Secretary Gates' leadership, judgment, and candor have earned him the trust and respect of all who have worked with him. Secretary Gates has combined vision and thoughtfulness with toughness, clarity, and courageous decision-making. Secretary Gates established a direct and open relationship with Congress and with our Senate Armed Services Committee in particular. As chairman of that committee, I will always be personally grateful for that. Secretary Gates' tenure as Secretary of Defense will be judged by history to have been truly exceptional. So our next Secretary of Defense will have enormous responsibilities, but also big shoes to fill. I am confident that Leon Panetta is the right person to take on that challenge, and I urge our colleagues to support this nomination. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Senator from
Mr. Cox.
Richard.
I would ask that that be unanimous consent that that be called off, that the quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
And now I would ask unanimous consent that the quorum call time be equally divided between both sides.
Without objection, so ordered.
And now I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise in strong support of President Obama's nominee to serve as our 23rd Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta. Big shoes to fill. Secretary Gates has had a remarkable term as Secretary and a remarkable career in public service. In addition, the challenges our military faces in this economic climate are significant. We must have a serious discussion about crafting a sustainable way forward. I sat down with Director Panetta earlier this month to discuss these challenges. I can say with certainty, Leon Panetta is up to the test. He has the experience and wisdom required, and I look forward to working with him once the Senate gives its advice and consent to his nomination. I've known Leon Panetta for a long, long time. We served together in the House of Representatives, and we've worked together in government for many years. He has an amazing history of public service to America. We served together on the House Budget Committee when we were both congressmen in the early 1990s, and he chaired that committee. He understands budgets and the challenges they present. As director of the Office of Management and Budgeting, he took that skill to the executive branch. And as chief of staff to President William Jefferson Clinton, he crafted the proposal which brought us to balance in our budget as a nation. It is hard to imagine that was only 10 years ago. We had a balanced federal budget. In fact, we were generating a surplus, putting that money into the Social Security Trust Fund to make it stronger. 10 years later, mired deep in debt, it's hard to imagine that that did happen, but it did. And Leon Panetta was a big part of that occurrence. He advised President George W. Bush on how to bring a close to the Iraq War in a responsible way. And for the last 2 years, he has had an awesome responsibility as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks to the President's strategic focus and Director Panetta's extraordinary leadership, Special Forces and CIA operatives were able to locate and capture Osama bin Laden last month in Pakistan. These are precisely the skills and experiences we need at the table at this moment. I know Leon Panetta is more than just a fellow colleague in the House and a person who shared some time in public service when I did. I know him as a person. I know his family. I know what he thinks. I know his values. And I have to tell you, President Obama and America are really fortunate to have a person of this quality who is willing to give even more of his life in public service. He could have stayed out in Monterey, California, his home area, and no hardship assignment, but he chose not to. He came to Washington to head up the Central Intelligence Agency and now has accepted this invitation to head up the Department of Defense. There's no question in my mind that he will bring to it an extraordinary skill level and amazing values. Director Panetta and I talked for a little bit about some subjects, and one near and dear to my heart, the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act is legislation that I introduced almost 10 years ago, allowing immigrant students who have no country an opportunity to contribute to America. These young people came to the United States with their parents when they were just kids and infants. They've lived here all their lives, and all they want is a chance to prove how much they love this country. The bill I introduced said there are 2 ways that they should be allowed to do it. One, to complete at least 2 years of college, to have obviously a high school diploma and good background, but another, to serve in our nation's military. I've been proud to have the support of Secretary of Defense Gates in this effort, and I look forward to the same support from the next Secretary, Panetta. The DREAM Act would strengthen our military. It would strengthen our nation. And I'm sure, as General Colin Powell has said, immigration is what's keeping this country's lifeblood moving forward, and these young people can help us move forward as a nation to be safer, and create more opportunity. We have a number of challenges ahead. Our men and women are fighting wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Libya. Service members and their families have borne an incredible burden of sacrifice in these conflicts over the last decade. As a nation, we are spending tens of billions of dollars to sustain them in their efforts. At the same time, public support for these undertakings will not last forever. The current situation needs to change, and the President's about to make an announcement when it comes to our troop levels in Afghanistan. We have to craft a way forward that will deal honestly and responsibly with what is possibly one of our most challenging situations in Afghanistan. It has to begin, I believe, with a substantial redeployment of U.S. troops back to America from Afghanistan. Last week, I joined Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, 24 of my colleagues, in a letter to the President expressing these concerns. I trust the President, the incoming Secretary of Defense, and Congress can find a responsible path forward. We need to take a hard look at every aspect of our federal budget, including the Department of Defense, to sustain our men and women in uniform, but not to waste money on privatization, on contractors, and on runaway contracts. As Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen has commented, our greatest national security threat is our ballooning deficit. Of course we need to protect our country, but we need to do it in a fiscally responsible manner. Even as we address the path forward in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, even as we trim the spending in the defense budget, we will not back away from our commitment to our men and women in uniform. I know that Leon Panetta shares that sentiment. Mr. President, I support Leon Panetta as our next Secretary of Defense, because now more than ever, we need his steady hand, his leadership to tackle these challenges in budgets, in management, and the critical conflicts we're engaged in around the world. I congratulate President Obama for selecting Leon Panetta for this awesome responsibility. I look forward to working with him on these issues and others in the years to come, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, as an initial point, I would ask unanimous consent that Danielle DeFont, a fellow in my office, be granted the privileges of the floor for the remainder of the 112th Congress.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to express my strong support for the nomination of Leon Panetta to be the next Secretary of Defense. Director Panetta comes to this job at an extraordinarily challenging time for the Department of Defense and for our nation. Among the many issues he will confront, Mr. Panetta will oversee the completion of our direct military operations in Iraq, the beginning of the transition of our forces in Afghanistan, the enhancement of our cyber defenses, and the reduction of our defense budget. I have known Leon Panetta for many years, and I know he is particularly well-suited to address all of these challenges. He is a man of great intellect, of great decency, and great determination. At the end of this year, for example, in compliance with the Status of Forces Agreement, we will conduct a withdrawal of our combat forces from Iraq and hand over primary responsibility for our ongoing relationship with the Department of State in regards to Iraq. It remains to be seen whether the Iraqi government will ask us to extend our military presence past December 31st. But for now, we are thoroughly and determinedly preparing our troops to leave. Having served as a member of the Iraq Study Group, Mr. Panetta certainly understands the importance of this transition and will carry it out. As the next Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta will also continue to focus our efforts on fighting terrorism in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We are facing a critical turning point in our operations. This week, we expect President Obama to announce his plan to begin reducing our force levels in Afghanistan this summer, a commitment he made in his speech at West Point in 2009. Along with the reduction in forces, we must sustain the security gains that we have accomplished during the past year and further build the capacity of the Afghani forces so that they are able to take full responsibility for their own security. Mr. Panetta understands how important it is for all of our agencies to work together in this effort and all security missions, that using military force may be our primary weapon in securing areas, but enduring success comes from coordination among the intelligence and law enforcement communities, from effective diplomacy, from effective assistance programs that are administered by the Department of State and the USAID. The conditions on the ground in Afghanistan are directly related to our ability to successfully attack the terrorist networks that are operating along the border in Pakistan. In his current position as director of the CIA, Mr. Panetta has reinvigorated these efforts, most notably with the successful raid on Osama bin Laden. Indeed, I believe when history looks back, outside of the critical and ultimate decision by the President of the United States, one of the most important roles played in this effort to prepare the way for those courageous SEALs was the steady leadership of Leon Panetta at the Central Intelligence Agency. He understands the complexity of our relationship with Pakistan and indeed throughout the world. This expertise, will be critical as we move forward, critical for our next Secretary of Defense. He will also lead the Department of Defense in preparing for the emerging threats to our national security, such as attacks to our cyber infrastructure. Indeed, every branch of government is working to define the roles various organizations will play in protecting people, infrastructure, and information within cyberspace. During his confirmation hearings before the Senate Armed Services Committee, I discussed with Director Panetta the strategy of the Department of Defense that they would employ in confronting the potential of a cyber attack against the United States. And he responded in no uncertain terms. His words, "I've often said that there's a strong likelihood that the next Pearl Harbor that we confront could very well be a cyber attack that cripples our power systems, our grid, our security systems, our financial systems, our governmental systems. This is a real possibility in today's world. And as a result, I think we have to aggressively be able to counter that." End of quote. Indeed, Mr. Panetta understands the future as well as the present, and he will bring his experience as well as his vision to bear on the emerging challenges that face the United States. And perhaps most challenging of all, Leon Panetta will lead the department in a time of great physical constraint. As our nation continues to find a path forward to rebound from the economic challenges of the last few years, there is an ever-growing pressure to reduce the size of the defense budget, which has nearly doubled over the past 10 years. We must be careful to do so in a way that removes unsustainable costs without losing vital capabilities. As a result of the high operational tempo and the duration of multiple overseas operations, all of our services are facing serious reset and recapitalization needs. Serious decisions will have to be made to ensure that we have the right systems in place to meet the threats we face, all at a price level that we can afford. Having served as the House Budget Committee Chairman and as the Director of the Offices of Management and Budget, there is no one that has more knowledge, more experience, more sense of the details than Leon Panetta. And he is the most well-qualified, I believe, individual to tackle the huge budgetary issues that are facing the Department of Defense. Now, Leon will have an extraordinary role to play, particularly in the wake of the extraordinary service of Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. I can't think of anyone I respect or admire more. I can't think of anyone who has served his country with more distinction, who has served it with more selfless dedication to the nation, and fundamentally, who's made his decisions knowing full well that at the end of the day, young Americans in the uniform of the United States will carry out his orders. Bob Gates has done a superb job, but I have every confidence that Leon Panetta will continue to carry on, will continue to meet those standards, will continue to lead the Department of Defense with distinction, with dedication, and great loyalty, and ultimately, just as Secretary of Gates has done, will know that at the end of all the decisions emanating from the Pentagon, there is a young American willing and able and ready to serve, to support this nation and defend us. With that, I rise to express my great support for Secretary-designate Panetta and wish him well in all of his endeavors and pledge to work with him closely. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor. Mr. President, I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.